Hi, I'm Paul Feinberg. We're here today with Professor Stuart Gabriel, Faculty Director of the Richard S. Ziman Center for Real Estate at UCLA. Stuart, at a recent conference, you said, real estate is the tail that wags the dog as it relates to the economy. Can you elaborate on why real estate is only a small segment of the overall economy, but it has such a large effect?
Well, Paul, you're exactly correct. Real estate is about 4% of GDP, but yet, as you know from the current conversation, could literally lead the entirety of the U.S. economy, if not the global economy, into an economic downturn. The housing sector is very cyclically sensitive. It's very sensitive to monetary policy and the Federal Reserve activity. In fact, the Fed often looks to the housing sector for what they call the transmission mechanism of monetary policy. So housing also has many what we call forward and backward linkages. It links into construction and materials. It links forward into home furnishing and all the rest, so that there are many ways that the housing sector sort of reaches its tentacles out into the rest of the economy. So despite its limited absolute size, its sensitivity means that it will either lead the rest of the economy into an economic downturn, often lead the rest of the economy out of an economic downturn. In 8 of the post-war recessions, housing has led the U.S. economy into the downturn and also out of that downturn, so that for those reasons we describe housing as the tail that wags the dog.
How would you describe the current state of the real estate economy? Is the word crisis too strong?
We should probably nuance here by separating housing from the rest of the real estate sector. And as you know, real estate is kind of a big word in the sense that it includes not only the assets themselves, that is the property markets, but also the markets for real estate debt. And those include the mortgage markets and the markets for mortgage-backed securities, the markets for other derivative securities that are new and are based on the mortgage-backed securities. So that there's a lot of ways to describe these markets. It is appropriate to say that the housing market is in a period of crisis at the moment. That's certainly not true for non-residential real estate, although we do see some modest weakening on the non-residential side, and we're very concerned that the weakness that we see in housing will creep into the non-residential side. For instance, if consumer spending weakens, then so will the market for retail real estate. All of the strip malls and the larger malls will see fewer gross proceeds, they'll see lower rents, they'll see increased vacancies, and this will be reflected in diminished cash flows and lower valuations for those properties. So that there is an appropriateness to distinguishing housing from the rest of commercial real estate. But that having been said, if you quote some of the federal officials that have spoken to this issue recently, housing today is in a 1 in 100 years sort of cataclysmic situation.
Speaking of the federal government, what actions do you expect them to take to deal with my word, crisis?
You know, it's always a concern that the federal government should be in front of the game, so to speak. But at the same time, it's a concern that the federal government acts appropriately. And sometimes, as you know, policy formulation and implementation can kind of be the equivalent of doing brain surgery with a chainsaw. So you may cure the disease and at the same time maybe kill the patient. So we always have to be careful about our enthusiasm for federal government intervention. And when you talk about the federal government, you know, we'd want to distinguish here between monetary policy and the Federal Reserve and any sort of fiscal policy or policy that could come out of the Bush administration. What's going on with the Bush administration is that they are about to announce a moratorium on resets above initial teaser rates on subprime adjustable rate mortgages that were originated in past years. And here it's appropriate to say that the policy is well-intentioned. They want to help some people that need help currently, but it's not clear that they're going to help all the right people. It's not clear they're going to help some of the wrong people. It's not clear that they're going to create an incentive structure that may be inappropriate, whereby some people decide to shift from being the right people to the wrong people in order to get help. It's not clear that any of this is going to make a real difference to housing outcomes. And if they do happen to stave off default on the part of some subprime borrowers, they may not ultimately avert default. They may just buy that borrower some time, but buying time may not at the end of the day be helpful to the recovery of markets. So as you can see, I'm not entirely enthusiastic with respect to this particular initiative. And of course, we can talk about the Fed at another time if that's something you'd like to do.
Before we do that, let's go back a bit. A lot of us aren't in real estate. We just live in real estate. We're not expert. We're expert by reading the newspaper and listening to the news. Can you talk a bit about how we got where we are? What happened? What came first? What was the chicken? What was the egg in this whole situation that we find ourselves in?
We have to hope that all of us are in real estate in the sense that all of us occupy a dwelling. Because if we don't, of course, we're homeless. And that's of course, a terrible thing and something that we have to think about carefully. How we got here? Well, it's kind of a long and sordid story. You can tell the story with some brevity, or you can tell it over, a period of many papers and many hours. But a short version of the story is that we have experienced significant problems of housing affordability in many of our metropolitan areas, which has led to the creation of new mortgage instruments, including many of these subprime, deeply discounted adjustable rate mortgages and piggybacks on top of first mortgages and all the rest. Mortgages that allowed many people to qualify for housing that really was above their head with respect to sort of normal affordability metrics, allowed people to get into housing without any so-called skin in the game, that is, without any down payment, without any equity in the house. Some bad decisions were made on the part of borrowers, on the part of lenders. I think the Fed, frankly, deserves some blame as well, in the sense that they held short-term interest rates very low for a very long period of time, where the federal funds rate was at a level of 1% for a period of years. And in that particular respect, created an environment where many households that ordinarily would have found themselves in rental housing qualified for home ownership, got themselves into a house they couldn't afford, and now with some downward adjustment in house prices, we see a literal tsunami of defaults and foreclosures washing across our shores.
I remember sitting in one of the recent Ziman conferences, and someone on one of your panels was talking about how real estate or homes are not just another commodity. People live in them, and so they'll do what they can to stay in them and not lose them. Who is losing their homes? Who are the delinquencies? Who are the defaults? Are there homeowners? Are they speculators? What do you see there?
Well, Paul, that's a great question. The old school is kind of the school that you cite here. It's a school of a household that saved its dollars very carefully to scrape together a formidable down payment to get into a house that they could afford and to enjoy the benefits of home ownership, to basically pay down that mortgage, to create a major asset in their portfolio, an asset that represented the primary wealth vehicle of the typical American family, and they sort of went forward through their life cycle with that in mind, ultimately even paying off that mortgage as they neared retirement. It's not clear that that's the same household we're talking about when we describe defaults in today's environment. Clearly, as you cite, there were speculators in the marketplace and people that bought five houses at once with the intention of flipping those homes within a number of months. And those speculators have been the first to default. They're the first to give back the keys, and we see very different behaviors there. And then we see other households who seem to not be of the attitude that they're going to, go without certain commodities in their lives and hang on to the house to the best of their ability, but yet less reticence to default, and we're seeing a lot of that crop up as well. So we're not really sure if behaviors are changing today as regards households' attitudes.
There's a lot of people throw around criticisms of subprime loans and other types of creative lending and how much those things created to our current state. But I've also heard experts say that they're in the business of putting people in homes, that there is still going to be a place for this type of lending. How do you see it all shaking out?
There must be room in our so-called menu of mortgage instruments for lower credit quality borrowers to qualify at a price and to obtain credit. I think that would be universally argued as being appropriate, assuming that the pricing of risk is appropriate. We live in, as I say, what's called a risk-based pricing world, and that means that it's no longer a world where everybody gets the same rate, but people get different rates and different numbers of points based on their risk profile, largely indicated by their credit score. So in that particular respect, we would want to see the continuation of subprime because we want to be in a position to offer credit to households who have experienced credit difficulty. But again, that credit has to be offered with appropriate terms and with appropriate pricing of risk, something that has gone by the wayside in the last few years.
A few moments ago, you touched on the performance of the Fed over the last several quarters or even over the last several years. Could you elaborate a bit on that? But also, what do you see happening with the Fed in the next month, 6 months, year? Any thoughts?
Well, you know, it's dangerous to ask an economist for a forecast, and particularly with respect to an interest rate forecast in the Fed. The crystal ball is always kind of murky, and there are always intervening events, and the Fed moves are always very data-driven. That having been said, it does look at this moment in time in early December of 2007 that the economy is weakening in a marked sense. The forecasts for this quarter and the first quarter of 2008 are for growth in the neighborhood of 1 to 2%, not far from a recession level. Again, the forecast, or rather the survey in the LA Times this morning suggests that 3/4 of surveyed households expect recession is impending, and in that context, the Fed is about the only game in town. The Fed will ease potentially aggressively, potentially in the range of even percentage points in order to blow the air into the economic balloon in a way that will avert a much more dangerous outcome, not only for the U.S., but potentially for the global economy.
One of the things that the Ziman Center does is aggregate all of this information and you know, look at it in its totality. What's the role of the economist, the academic, of a place like the Ziman Center? How can they contribute to the public discourse or even shape or impact public policy?
Well, the good news about UCLA is that we're not selling mortgages and we're not selling property. What we are seeking to achieve is insight and high quality dissemination of knowledge, high quality assessment of data. We're seeking to promote that in the quality of our coursework in the Anderson School and the MBA program, or in many of our other programs around the UCLA campus. We're seeking to promote that in the high quality of research that's done by our affiliated faculty. And we're seeking to do that in the way that we interface with the professional community, where we ask the professional community to come to UCLA to share their experience and knowledge with our students, with our researchers, and we in turn share our research with the professional community. So it's potentially a very productive relationship, and a relationship where, again, the quest is for insight and for knowledge, and this is something that is obviously a value added of a very high quality university like UCLA.
Let's look a little bit towards the future. based on where we are now, what the industry's learned, what experts and economists such as yourself have learned, what are some of the changes we're going to see in the real estate sector, the real estate economy over the next year or so?
Well, we've unfortunately seen way too many changes in the last 6 months, in the sense that many of our real estate debt markets, especially on the residential side, are no longer functioning. They're frankly simply closed. Outside of what we call GSE conforming loans, that are loans that are purchased by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, we essentially today are without secondary mortgage markets on the residential side. As you know, our markets for residential mortgage derivatives in the form of what we call CDOs, or collateralized debt obligations, those markets are closed as well. And as you know, our menu of mortgage instruments looks like a menu for dining in Stalinist Russia in several decades ago, in the sense that there aren't too many entrees on the menu at the moment. And I say that from experience, having dined in the Soviet Union in the 1970s, where there was a very large menu of entrees, but yet when it came time to order, very few of those entrees were available. I bring that in by way of an example of the fact that many of the mortgage instruments today are no longer available, and we want to go back in the next couple of years to a situation where more instruments will come back into the mainstream of the mortgage menu, and those instruments will be securitized in more liquid capital markets. We hope that we'll get back to that sooner as opposed to later.